Final Fantasy II can be looked at in two very different ways. I will be trying to do both in this video. I will be looking at the game in the context of a review. In this light, Final Fantasy II is, without a doubt, the worst Final Fantasy game. It's not my personal least favourite, but objectively it is easily the worst game in the series. This view is built on the foundation of combat and gameplay, an absolute mess of a system that is like if Final Fantasy and Fire Emblem had a baby, but it turned out the two were cousins, so the baby came out a monstrosity. However, there is another way to look at this game, in the context of a retrospective. In this light, Final Fantasy II is, without a doubt, one of the most important games in the entire series. I am absolutely and resolutely confident in saying that without Final Fantasy II, there is no modern Final Fantasy. This view is built on the foundation of story and characters, an incredible leap forward from Final Fantasy I that, for its time, must have been an incredibly special experience to play. And with that, I would like to welcome you to my video on Final Fantasy II. Unlike my video on Final Fantasy I, we will not be going over every aspect in great detail, as much remains the same from that game to this one. Instead, I will be focused on the growth and evolution from game to game. While things like gear, towns, and exploration will be covered, I will be placing a much greater emphasis on the two elements that define this game: characters and combat. This will be done in the context of a retelling of the game's story and plot. Before we get started though, I need to mention that this review is based on two things: the pixel remaster version of the game and a second playthrough. While this didn't mean much for Final Fantasy I, this is very important to make clear when talking about the sequel. Also, while you definitely don't need to watch it to enjoy this, I will be writing this video with the goal of building upon what I established in my Final Fantasy I video. So, with that out of the way, let's start the game that defined a series. As we create a new game, the person who's played Final Fantasy I before this gets flashbanged. What is this? 4 characters, each with a unique sprite and their own name already in there? This is our, mind very light, introduction to our main party we will be playing as throughout the game. I'll hold off on giving them a full introduction until after we've seen the opening cutscene, but for now, the fact that these 3 have canon names is a great sign that the game will be taking more care than its predecessor to give unique traits and personalities to our main 3. Yes, by the way, I am intentionally saying 3, as if you haven't played this game before, you may be unaware that there is an imposter among us. One of these characters is not actually a main party member. More on that when we get there though. Going with the canon names, we are thrust into the opening cutscene. In my last video, I said that an opening cutscene was dual purpose, that it needed to establish tone and story. This cutscene does both with flying colours. We first see the Emperor of the Empire of Palamacia set ablaze a quiet forest town, then jump to a throne room, where upon invasion by noticeably evil looking sprites, a young man sacrifices himself to let another man and a woman escape, the woman giving him a sad look before being rushed away. Then, we are told of 4 youths whose parents were just killed in the invasion. Suddenly, BAM! We're in a fight? We're introduced here to said youths who were up against 4 imposing black knights. The only option here is to attack them, so we do, but it's no match. If we get off an attack, we deal no damage to the knights. Meanwhile, when they attack us, we're instantly one-shot by an attack, doing hundreds of more damage than our health. Obviously, we lose. We are awoken with the woman from the throne room and a healer who is mending Firion back to life before leaving him to wake up on his own. While we still have a bit more of opening cutscene to go, I'll cut it here just to quickly talk about what we've seen. This opening cutscene has gone above and beyond the expectations set by Final Fantasy I. We've seen the tone of the game, loss and tragedy as shown in the throne room scene, destruction and malice as seen in the firebombing of the peaceful town, and rebellion and fighting against impossible odds in the scripted loss. We've also been given a chance to understand the story. An evil empire has begun their invasion of the world, and us, 4 youths barely able to escape the slaughter, wish to fight back against them. On top of this though, this cutscene focuses the story on characters. Characters are the heart of Final Fantasy II, as we will see in the second part of the cutscene. Awakening from death, Firion leaves the room and reunites with 2 of his companions, Maria and Guy. Aside from a friendship that is established by them fighting together, we hear a little more about their personalities and interpersonal relationships. Maria is shown to be a very caring woman, with a budding interest in Firion. She also shows concern for her missing brother Leon. Meanwhile, Guy, through the way he talks, is shown as more brutish, a simple man. After confirming they are okay, the 3 enter the makeshift throne room to talk to Hilda, the princess of the kingdom that was just invaded. Finn, scored by a top 5 all-time Pixel Remaster OST, the Wild Rose theme, She tells the party, who are eager to fight with the rebellion she's established, that while they lack experience, the rebellion could use their support. With intel about the captives being held in Fynn, the party resolves to journey there and rescue them. So, unlike FF1's opening, which promises a world that never really existed, this cutscene does the opposite. It smacks us across the face with a world we have to save, with themes much more relatable than restoring light to crystals. It also does a fantastic job at introducing the main characters as, well, actual characters. The dichotomy between FF1's Warrior of Light and Firion and Friends is really interesting to see, as they are a very different approach to what a hero is. While the FF1 Warrior of Light starts their journey as a badass, able to slay legendary knights off the bat, Firion's party starts it from square one, as kids, getting beat up by actual soldiers. It sets up a hero's journey for their characters to go on, one of growth. It also establishes personal stakes for all the characters. These kids have lost their parents to the Empire, and Maria her brother, so of course they want to fight back. Same with Hilda, she's lost her kingdom, so it fits well for her to lead the rebellion. Also, I brushed over it, but putting a scripted loss in the opening is already 100 times more interesting and advanced than any storytelling tool used in Final Fantasy I. This ambition to test new ideas pays massive dividends throughout the rest of the game's story, even if it's what kills the gameplay. Before we leave Altair, we can see the man from the opening who escaped with Hilda. We learn his name is Gordon, and he believes himself to be a coward for not fighting for the rebellion. If we were paying attention though, and are able to recognise him from the opening, we can put together as well that he must also be feeling shameful and guilty about letting his brother sacrifice himself for him. As we make our way out to Fynn, past the sleepy town of Katrea, it's a good time to give a very brief, very broad overview of the combat. Before I do though, now is probably a good time to make something clear. In my FF1 video, I sectioned off a part of the video to do a big combat, then story discussion. However, for this video, like how Final Fantasy II takes risks in evolving what came before it, I'll try to do the same. Instead of one discussion for both, I'll be splitting my breakdown of gameplay and story across the entire video, as out of all the elements of this game, these two are far and above more interesting to talk about than anything else. So, with that in mind, let's do an overview of the combat system. On the more back-end side of things, this game carries over the same Beyblade-like combat as FF1. The difference is born from combat mechanics, and more specifically, the leveling system. Fundamentally, the idea behind FF2's combat is this: the more you use something in battle against the enemy, the better you get at using that thing. So, for example, the more you use your sword or cast a fire spell, the higher level that individual skill gets. As a skill or spell levels up, generally, you get more value from that skill or spell. If that's a little vague, don't worry, we're going to be talking about this a lot throughout the video. But right now, I just want to imprint the general idea. If we want to pull from other games, think how you would level weapons in Fire Emblem or Romancing Saga 2. I love the idea of this. It allows a player to plan out their own build for a character and feel like they are making it themselves, rather than picking something out of a menu in the opening. However, if the game teaches us anything, it's that this system is very fragile, and there is a very, very wide valley between doing it right and completely failing. Let's leave that there for now though. As we arrive in Fynn, we see the entire town is crawling with Imperial presence. We can't go into any of the shops or even talk to the guards without getting into an encounter we are too weak to win. I love this a lot. I mean a lot. All the more for the fact, this is exactly what I was criticising FF1 for in towns like Provoker. Provoker in that game is meant to be overrun with pirates, but there is no pirate presence. It's clean and you can go anywhere. In Fynn though, no one sees this place and questions if it's under oppressive Imperial control or not. It's an excellent bridging of story with environment, and made all the better for it being a recurring trend in this game. Proceeding along, we arrive at the inn and talk to the man behind the counter. Here, we need to utilise a unique dialogue mechanic, the Ask-Learn system. What this looks like in practice is when you're in dialogue with important NPCs, they will sometimes say a word in red. This word can be learned by the party and used to ask them and other important NPCs in the world about that same topic. Each word can also be used in different contexts. For example, the term Wild Rose can be used as a secret password for the rebellion to get access to the counter at the inn, but it can also be used later in the game to take an alternate route through a dungeon. I think this system is an interesting innovation that really fits the style of story this game is trying to tell. One more mission by mission based, more on that very soon. After speaking the password to the innkeep, we go down to meet Scott, the brother of the man we spoke to in Altair, Gordon. On his deathbed, he gives us his final words, that he wishes for Gordon to know that he has great strength in him, as well as to tell Hilda he loves her. However, on reflection, he knows that it would be best not tell her this fact to spare her further heartbreak. Finally, he gives us his ring, as it is implied it carries a strength within it, but also likely is just a memento of his sacrifice. He then passes away, the first of many, many character deaths in this game. Scott's death isn't super impactful, as we haven't spent much time with him or learnt about him. Plus, when he dies, the fanfare plays for obtaining the ring regardless though. It sets an expectation that the rest of the game will follow through with, that the characters in this game are not safe, and death is on the table. Back in Altair, we offer Hilda the ring and bring the news of Scott's passing. She is understandably upset by this, and asks if he said anything before he passed. I love little moments like this. They say a lot about the character in so few words. It's something modern games do frequently, so to see it here in 1988 is awesome. It's even greater considering that FF1 really didn't have any character with a personality deeper than a puddle. There is already a stronger relationship between Hilda and Scott, and Firion and Maria, than any in FF1, and that evolution deserves applause. Wrapping this up, Hilda gives us our next mission. We are to go to the snowy mountain town of Salamand to make contact with Joseph, who we must liaise with to find Mithril. This will bring the rebellion a much needed gear upgrade. To help us, she tasks her personal white wizard Minwu to come with us and provide assistance to the recovery. Minwu helps the party by giving them a canoe to reach Paloon, a port town we can travel further north from, as well as joining as a guest 4th party member. This exchange establishes 3 major things. The first is the story structure the rest of the game will follow. Firion and friends will get a mission from Hilda, and they must go and complete that mission before returning to Hilda to get their next one. There's nothing inherently wrong with this structure. It works well for games with a greater focus on story, like Final Fantasy II does. We are able to see character reactions and hear their motivations for all the events of the game. Now, does this mean that on the entirety the game feels less like a grand adventure like FF1 did? I'd argue yes, it does. You don't get told to go places in FF1, instead it feels, when the game is doing it well, like natural exploration. The next thing is the temporary party system and how this interacts with the story. Throughout the game, we'll frequently be getting a 4th temporary party member. From a story perspective, this is a fantastic way of getting the player invested in the characters. As in a JRPG, if you can't write compelling characters, not saying the characters in this game aren't compelling, but they are a little shallow, the best thing to do is force the player to spend time with them by fighting together. There's a specific example of a character called Layla we'll discuss later, where just having her in the party makes the story moment with her character feel much more believable. And finally, is the temporary party system again, but this time it's how it interacts with gameplay. I'll stay positive on this for now, as Minwu is probably the best example of this. If you've ever played Fire Emblem, you'll be able to recall those units that join you from the beginning that are like a level 20 paladin, really OP, can one-shot everything. Now, noobs will use them frequently to clear maps, however gamers like us know better. We only use them for emergencies. On a first playthrough, I think it's very reasonable for a player of this game to come to the same conclusion. There is an OP unit meant to be used sparingly or as a heal bot, and when using him like that, his addition to the party is great. However, on a second playthrough, this illusion breaks down slightly. Sure, you can still use him this way, and you would probably be having a better time for it, but someone like me just cannot stand the idea of wasting XP. It really grinds my gears. So having Minwu, someone who will leave the party, get QA XP that another member of the party could be getting? Not on my watch, champ. This issue will only get worse as we get more party members, and I will expand more upon why this way of handling 4th party members is antithetical to the mission statement of this game's combat system. So, with Minwu in tow, we make our way to Paloon. Something to note here is an interesting contrast in how this game handles restricting exploration versus how FF1 did it. In FF1, you couldn't go somewhere because you either didn't have the required mode of transportation like the ship or airship, or you hadn't progressed the story enough to change the world in a way that made it accessible, a la the canal. This game takes a very different approach though. Instead of being hardline blocked, you instead are restricted by areas having enemies way too strong for you to face at the start of the game. For example, here I tried exploring west near Finn, and got totally wrecked by the enemies there. I really like this approach to exploration. I think both the FF1 approach and the FF2 approach have their place, but the game being willing to experiment with how the world map is done is something I admire the developers for trying. It's also, I think off the top of my head, the only time this is done in the series, right? Once we arrive in Paloom, we take the boat to Poft, I really like the look of Poft. Just the look of the circular port surrounded by houses and shops on increasing elevation resonated with me. It is also here that we meet Sid for the first time. So, fun fact, Sid was actually not in the original FF1. The reference we see to him in the Pixel remaster was added in a later version of the game. So that means this character here is not only the first actual character version of Sid, but the first Sid in Final Fantasy. Final Fantasy 2 has a ton of these, by the way. Monsters, characters and items that will become through lines for the series. By themselves, they're a little vapid, but the sheer quantity of things this game introduced just add to my assertion of the importance of this game. Making our way north, we arrive in Salamand, a beautiful town surrounded by snowy mountains, seemingly untouched by the Empire. Walking the streets though, we begin to see what's happened here. The Empire has kidnapped and enslaved the men of the town to work in Summit Falls to mine for mithril. Talking with Joseph, he refuses to help us until we rescue the townspeople from the falls. Now, something to note here, rescuing the townspeople and getting mithril are both done in Summit Falls, so I wonder if this line implies the intended way to play the session is to rescue the townspeople, return to Salamand to talk to Joseph just to be told the mithril was deeper in the mine you just backtracked out of? Honestly, given the bullshit to come in parts 2 and onwards of this video, I would not be surprised. But thank God I didn't do it this way and instead just powered through the falls, doing both in one trip. Speaking of the falls, as a first dungeon this isn't actually all that bad. It's not great by any means, but the idea of a cave in a waterfall fits the layout and it's not egregiously long. Specifically, the pacing of the story to dungeon ratio here is good. There's enough story that's gone on recently to make a slightly too long dungeon very bearable. Before we reach the bottom, we free the enslaved people of Salamand as well as Paul, a professional thief who steals from the Empire. Proceeding to the bottom of the cave, we find the Sergeant, the mini-boss of the dungeon, guarding a chest with mithril. It's not actually a mini-boss though, it's just a reskin of a random encounter enemy that we are able to defeat super easily. That's a big issue with this game, by the way, difficulty. This is one of the easiest video games I've ever played. Easier than FF1 if it can be believed. I'll bring this up again when there is an especially crazy example of horrible difficulty scaling, but just keep in mind going forward that, like FF1, this game is extremely easy until the final boss, which is a very notable exception. As we make our way back to Altair, let's discuss more about combat, specifically about the leveling system. We've already established that in this game, you level weapons and spells by using them. However, what we didn't cover in the explanation was how you leveled your main stats. Strength, intellect, stamina, the same stats as FF1. Well, the game tries to explain this to you in the very beginning in this side tutorial room. I'll show on screen now the explanation for each. However, what you are reading right now is not true. Well, it is kinda true, but this is not nearly enough information. How many attacks do I need to do to level strength? Does it matter how much damage I do to level strength? Why do I feel like there are long stretches of game where I attack a lot but get no stat level ups? If agility is raised through fighting battles with high evasion, wouldn't the strategy be to wear no armor and 2 shields? That contradicts what the sage just before this told me, to always be upgrading my weapons and armor. You can't buy high evasion armor in this game, you just have to stay unequipped. What I'm trying to impart here is the feeling you get by playing this game. You just don't have enough information by playing the game alone. You can look online, God knows I did, but the information there is super contradictory and honestly, I have no interest in passing it out. If the game isn't going to explain its own systems to an adequate level, the onus is not on the player to Google it to find out. That is a fundamental flaw in game design. But all that aside anyways, do you actually need to know what's going on in the back end to get through the game? You may think the answer is no, given how easy I said the game was a few minutes ago, but I would strongly argue the opposite. I think it is essential to both have an understanding and be interested in how combat works to be able to tolerate FF2. As for why, let's leave it for another discussion on dungeons and random encounters. But please keep a mental note of this as it is pivotal for explaining the abject failure that is this game's combat. Returning to Altair, we give the mithril to the town blacksmith who is able to craft a whole new stock of weapons and armor for the rebellion and for us through the shops. From a story perspective, I love how getting mithril doesn't just power up the rebellion in lore, we also get to feel the power up by having access to more powerful gear. It's more tying of gameplay to story. Speaking of, from a gameplay perspective, expanding the shops at towns we are frequently returning to is a great way of keeping the player engaged with the town, which makes it all the more baffling this is done in this part of the game, where I feel we have seen a great variety of towns instead of later in the game, where we may have seen 1 or 2 new towns in the past 5 hours of game time. Speaking with Hilda now, we are told that disrupting the Empire's operation in the Falls has scrambled the Empire, and more specifically, the Dark Knight, giving us an opening to attack their secret weapon, the Dreadnought. We are told to head to Bafsk, a city to the far east whose people are being enslaved to build the Dreadnought, to infiltrate the airship and destroy it. At Bafsk, we see, similar to Finn, that the town is overrun with guards. After finding a disgruntled Imperial guard, we gain access to Bafsk Cave, really just a sewer. A short dungeon standing between the town and the Dreadnought. Like Sediment Falls, this also isn't that bad of a dungeon. It's short and not too much of a pain to navigate. Nothing much to say about here really, other than it's the last time I enjoyed a dungeon in the game for a long time. It's mostly downhill from here. But let's stay positive. Up to this point, Final Fantasy II has put its best foot forward. Things that become major issues like pacing are done quite well in this portion of the game, so it hasn't felt like too much of a chore to get through, and it gets better from here. Arriving at the end of Bafsk Cave, we see the Dark Knight Hilda mentioned. It seems she got some bad intel and he was able to finish the Dreadnought just before we arrived. He leaves us with a demand to kneel before the Emperor as he boards the airship. Then, an old commander of Finn that Scott had mentioned betrayed us, Borgen, comes out to mock us, saying that we have lost. If I can't include me closing the game for the last time, this is my favourite moment in the game. We see the Dreadnought brutally bomb the towns we have travelled to over this portion of the game. First Paloom and then Altair. Palamacia has won the battle. Their march of destruction has begun, and the sense of urgency for us to stop it is palpable. Part 2 starts strong. We are forced to backtrack past the ruined towns the Dreadnought has destroyed on our way back to Altair. The beautiful town of Poft is in ruins. Bomb craters are everywhere, the roofs of houses are crumbling. We speak to an NPC and she says they're dead. They're all dead. The despair here is immense. We take the ship back to Paloom. Maybe that's in better shape? But no, it's just as bad, perhaps even worse, with NPCs saying things like, I don't think I'm gonna make it, and they killed my daughter. Nowadays, video games have gotten pretty comfortable with having a very dark and depressing tone. It's become popular. But imagine being in 1988, having just played Final Fantasy I, a game with a much different tone, and then seeing this. It's brutal, it's shocking, it's an absolute innovation for Final Fantasy. I cannot, as a fan of this series, praise enough this game's willingness to take risks with its story and themes. This game, and the series as a whole, benefited greatly because of it. Returning to Altair, we see the town in a similar state of disrepair. Luckily, it looks like the tavern acting as the rebel base was left unharmed, and the people have crowded there for safety. Talking with Hilda, Minwu leaves the party to tend to the wounded, as well as the King of Finn, whose health is taking a turn for the worse after the attack. Minwu never returns to the party after this, so I can only hope that for people doing their first playthrough, they didn't spend time building his character or grinding with him in the party under the impression he would come back in some way down the track. From here, I'll skip ahead a bit in the story, as the next section involves going to Sid, then returning to Altair, but pretty much, we have found out to destroy the Dreadnought, we need to make our way inside Kashuan Keep to obtain the Sunfire, a fuel for airships that have given too much will overload and destroy the entire ship. However, to do so, we need to gain access to the keep, which requires either the voice of Kashuan royalty or the goddess bell to break the seal. Since Gordon has disappeared from Altair after the attack, we must rely on the goddess bell, which Hilda suggests enlisting Joseph's help to retrieve, as it is known to reside deep in the snow plains near where he lives. So, travelling back to Salamand, Joseph agrees to act as a guide to help us attain the goddess bell, joining our party for the trip back to Sediment Falls to attain the snowcraft, then over the plains to the snow cabin. I reckon this is as good a time to slow it down a bit to talk further on combat, more specifically what leveling a skill or spell means. We can assume that by leveling Firian's sword skill, that represents him getting better with swords and therefore his ability to deal damage with them. Sure, okay, no worries. We can assume that by leveling shield on Maria, that means she is getting better at using shields, and therefore will have higher evasion with them equipped. Not totally correct, but most of the way there. They do increase the evasion effect with shields, but it also boosts agility passively, increasing speed to take a turn and base evasion. We can assume by leveling Blink on Guy, the evasion boosting effects of Blink get stronger. Okay, but by how much? How strong is level 1 Blink? It's not really quantifiable like leveling swords or spells are. There are multiple spells like this. Blink, Protect, Shell, Haste, and Berserk are some examples. Not being told the effects and impact of leveling up these spells make the experience of grinding them feel very hollow. Sure, I could spend 20 minutes spamming Protect unnecessarily, but what would that actually get me? A 5% efficacy increase? 10%? Not letting the player in on these details of your combat system is a critical mistake by the game. I understand that there is value in simplicity. I don't need to know the back end of God of War's combat to have fun with that game, but the difference between God of War and Final Fantasy II is that in God of War, I'm not put into a random encounter every 3 seconds. In a dungeon that takes maybe 30 to 40 minutes to complete, I don't need to fully understand combat to have fun, because the game isn't 80% combat like Final Fantasy II's is. Following up on this, I think it's time to talk about dungeons in our third cave dungeon in a row, with the exact same style of layout as the previous two. The dungeons in Final Fantasy II are atrociously designed, easily the worst I have ever seen in a video game, and by far the worst in Final Fantasy. There are a few elements that form this view, so let's go over them one by one. The first is the random encounter rate. It is so unbelievably high in this game for no reason. It constantly gives a feeling of futility between encounters since the time between them is so short. So just immediately flee from battle, you say? Sure, I'll do that and then get to the final boss of the game and be completely walled because you can't deal damage to the guy unless you use the gimmick items if you are playing the game blind. Next point, layout. 90% of dungeons, from their layout alone, are indistinguishable. In my FF1 video, I went hard on Metaphor for doing this, and I can't believe it, but it's worse here. Every dungeon is just a random spattering of hallways that lead to dead ends or chests with like a single potion or antidote in them. Then there are the dungeons with multiple paths. Going into a dungeon and seeing 2 sets of stairs down, every time I saw it, and trust me, you see it a fair bit, made me feel abject dread, knowing the game would be forcing me to waste my time. Also on layout, in the most indescribably stupid, idiotic, and just downright horrible decision ever, floors of dungeons have a lot of doors, most of which, if you go through them, put you in the smack dab middle of a room with a high random encounter rate. There is zero purpose to these. It is purely to waste your time. I despise this with all my being. It absolutely baffles me to see this regression from FF1's amazing dungeons to these pieces of shit. So random encounter rates, layout, what next? Oh yeah, length. Likely due to the high random encounter rate, dungeons from this point of the game onwards take so long to complete. The pacing between dungeon to story from here on is so lopsided towards dungeons, it makes the entire experience, and I mean this with no hyperbole, miserable to play. Okay, let's take a breath. Brass tacks though, while Metaphor's dungeons suck, the combat is fun, so it's not miserable to play. My goal in this video, with what you've heard up to now, and will hear soon about combat, is to convince you that the combat does not save this game like it does for Metaphor. It is the silver bullet that kills Final Fantasy II. Deep in the cavern, we come across a floor containing a colony of beavers. In the most shocking twist of the gaming generation, Guy steps up to the plate to speak to them. I love little character details like this. The game is rife with them, and it never ceases to make the cast feel more fleshed out. From Maria telling a random NPC hitting on her to get lost, to Kai speak beaver, all of it gives amazing characterization that coming from FF1 is amazing for evolution. Oh, also, before we wrap up the snow cabin, you may have noticed Joseph was doing God's work at being the party's floor tank. This is the approach I take with the guest party member for the rest of the game. We never get another guest party member that feels like the old man cavalier unit from Fire Emblem, so I just kill them as soon as they arrive to not have them steal EXP from the party. Looking back on this now, writing the video and having finished the game, I think this logic doesn't really hold for FF2. I assumed it was a better game than it was. I mean, surely there wouldn't be a hidden system that meant you get no combat EXP at all from a lot of battles, right? Right? No, surely not. Anyways, crash out aside, we get the goddess bell after fighting the first appearance of the Adamantoise in the series. It constantly gave me a dumb smile, seeing the enemies that would become recurring after this game. I'll make an effort to point them out from now on, but another one we've also seen to this point is the bomb. So, slaying the beast, we get the bell. Before we are able to leave, we are stopped by Borghen. While we are able to slay him, before he dies, he activates a hidden boulder trap that is about to crush the party. In the last moment though, Joseph stays back to hold the boulder in place, letting the party escape. He nobly sacrifices himself, dying before us. Joseph is another one of the many characters who die in this story. Having party members die is still rare today, but it's not super shocking. In 1988 though, having just played Final Fantasy I, I can imagine this would be a really impactful moment. I doubt death was something covered in a lot of video games at the time, so seeing it here is really something special. Now, I say that as someone on their second playthrough, someone who put no time into building Joseph or increasing his stats, so I can recognise this at a story level while being disconnected from the gameplay side of things. Said gameplay side of things is something someone on their first playthrough must be going through right now. Any time and effort you spent into building Joseph, throw it in the trash. He's out of here. It's been a while since I played this game for the first time, so I can't speak on my personal experience, but I'd speculate I wouldn't have been happy. To that version of me, sucked in nerd, should have played a better game. With the goddess bell in hand, we travel back to Poff to speak to Sid, who offers us a ride to Cashuan Keep. As we enter, we see Gordon has beat us to it. When it is first revealed he had gone missing after the Dreadnought attack, the story frames it as him abandoning the rebels like the coward he says he is. But seeing him here is a reveal that he wasn't a coward. He used his voice as a Cashuan royalty to enter the keep to try and retrieve the Sunfire himself, and live up to the person his brother Scott saw in him. Throughout the game, Gordon goes through the most character development, going from a timid, cowardly man guilt-ridden over his brother's sacrifice to a strong, confident leader willing to rebuild his nation. The confident leader part is something that happens textually in the story, but the strong part happens through gameplay as Gordon joins your party for the next portion of the game. Or at least it should happen in gameplay, if you're not like me and instantly nerf the nerd to stop him from stealing EXP for the rest of my party. But you know what? I have an imagination. I can imagine what the developers intended here and I like it. Good job. Speaking of gameplay, as we progress through the keep, let's raise another issue with combat. This is less so a massive, permeating issue as more so something just super silly. So Esuna in Final Fantasy II is a cure spell meant to be able to cure things like poison or blindness, right? Okay, great. So what's the issue? Like all spells in this game, Esuna needs to be leveled. And what is the impact of leveling a spell like this? Well, what else, other than the chance for it to function? That's right, a level 1 Esuna will do absolutely nothing. So how often do you get the chance to use Esuna to level it? Like twice in the whole game. That's right. There were only 2 times where I was in combat and needed to dispel a status effect. So all in all, this means the intended way to level Esuna in this game is to sit in a random encounter and just spam it on yourself to level it up. I mean, come on guys, why wouldn't I just get the items instead? There is no reason other than an intense desire to waste my own time to level a spell like that. I have zero clue what they were thinking here. Continuing on in this dungeon, we fight the Red Spirit, another random encounter enemy turned mini-boss by the way, and attained Eagle's Torch, the item needed to transport Sunfire. Leaving the keep now with Sunfire in hand, we see Sid's airship approaching the keep to pick us up. However, it is being pursued by the Dreadnought, which captures the ship and anyone inside it. Before we make our way back to Altair, a tragedy occurred on my playthrough. Instead of going south a little from the keep, I ran back, missing this small patch of forest that's glowing. In here, we can find a clearing full of the best creatures Final Fantasy has graced this world with, chocobos. Hopping on one, we can actually use it to travel back to Altair with fast speeds and no random encounters. All the while, it plays the absolute hood classic chocobo theme. Of all the things for this game to establish for the series, a mature story, engaging character arcs, introducing chocobos truly trumps them all. Back in Altair, we are told Hilda was on the airship captured by the Dreadnought, and that the ship was docked to the far north of Finn. We leave the tavern with everyone's encouragement. They believe in us to infiltrate the airship, blow it up, and save Hilda. Before we enter the Dreadnought, the final dungeon of this section of the game, I'd like to highlight that in our 3 or 4 hours of this section, we have seen 0 new towns. This continues from here, as if we exclude getting access to Finn's stores, there is only 1 new town to be revealed in the rest of the game. This just builds on the idea that the second half of the game is extremely poorly paced. Discovering new towns and settlements is an essential part in any Final Fantasy game. It's always an exciting discovery to explore the shops for what's sold, speak to its people, and see the unique town designs. This game nearly completely lacks it from part 2 onwards, just further putting pressure on combat and dungeons to completely carry the game, which, as I'm sure you can guess, I don't think held up. As we venture into the Dreadnought, we are greeted by a guard who can be approached in 2 ways. We can give him the pass to enter without a fight, or we can save the rebel password to fight him. I never had another moment like this where I felt like I could use the arts-learned dialogue system to approach a problem in multiple ways. However, I can imagine if you played the game in a different order than I did, for example skipping the trip back to Altair or just to go where Hilda will tell you preemptively, there may be a similar use case. As we venture through the Dreadnought to save Hilda and Sid as well as find the engine, it's about that time again, time for another grilling of combat. On the menu today, we have spell names and descriptions. Let's take this spell, Aura. Enhances the effectiveness against various enemy types when used in battle. Excuse me, what? What the hell is that meant to mean? It's not even a hard spell to describe, it just adds a damage bonus to attacks based off an enemy's elemental weaknesses. Like, why wasn't that the description? Oh wait, that's right, it's this game's twisted effort for simplicity again. Let's keep cracking on. After saving Hilda and Sid, we arrive at the engine where we dump the Sunfire. After we do so, the Death Knight rushes out in shock. It looks like we have gotten them back for Basque. As we leave though, Maria recognizes their voice. I wonder what this implies about their identity. This is an interesting question, as I think by this time in the game, someone on their first playthrough has completely forgotten about the fourth party character we named at the start of the game. I mean, they haven't brought him up since the beginning. I, at least, know I forgot about him when I was doing my first playthrough. Forgetting Leon has some interesting consequences. From a story perspective, I think you are meant to put the pieces together in this scene that the Death Knight is Leon. However, I think this is the only example in this game where not naming your characters something unique hurts. If you put time and effort into naming all 4 characters, I think you are more likely to remember Leon and therefore have that aha moment here. That aside though, the story isn't harmed if you do forget about him. Gameplay on the other hand, let's save that talk for when we get him in our party and we have the whole game in retrospect. Blowing up the Dreadnought is a major win for the Rebellion. The threat posed since the beginning of the game has been neutralised and we are offered a welcome moment of hope and reprieve in the middle of a very bleak story. Back in Altair, we learn that the King's condition has deteriorated. We talk to him in his final moments where he asks Gordon to help Hilda lead the rebellion, temporarily taking charge while she recovers from the events in the Dreadnought. This is a big moment for Gordon's character. The position of leadership has been thrust upon him, no more hiding behind Scott. He accepts the position. His journey with us has given him the courage to live up to his brother's legacy. He leaves the party to lead the rebellion. The King then informs Minwu that the time has come to unseal the Ultimatome, a mission Minwu accepts before disappearing to search for it. Finally, he tells us to travel to Deist, the home of the Dragoons, the first mentions of Dragoon in Final Fantasy, the coolest shot by the way. We need to try and find any survivors of the Empire's massacre there, and he believes Finn needs the Dragoons and their wyverns to win the war. Shortly after saying this, he passes away. After figuring out the location of the small island to the east, we make our way to Paloom, meeting a pirate who offers us a ride. The party is suspicious of this possibly being a trap, but faced with no other choice we accept. It turns out to be a trap. Of course, there wouldn't have been dialogue otherwise. The real surprise comes when after defeating the pirates, the leader called Layla gives us her ship and joins our party as a new temporary member. With that, we have unlocked the ship in a moment that, while feeling somewhat cool, isn't nearly as exciting as in FF1. This is a good chance to talk about the world map of FF2 in comparison to the first games, and why its design hinders the feeling of adventure and discovery FF1 had. Final Fantasy 1 has 3 very unique, very distinct continents with plenty of ocean in between them. You can't access these continents without the ship or eventually the airship. However, in Final Fantasy 2, the game is set on one continent. You can travel to 90% of the locations on foot, with the exceptions of Deist and the tropical island. This completely transforms the feeling of getting the ship, doubly so the airship due to the circumstances of that unlock. In FF1, the ship was a tool of adventure, exploration and discovery. In FF2, the ship is an access pass to 2 locations, a tool of convenience to travel further with less random encounters. I much prefer FF1's approach to vehicles of exploration, and luckily the rest of the series will adhere to FF1's approach. Arriving at Castle Deist, we make the harrowing discovery that the Dragoons have been wiped out, and the last wyvern is close to passing away. After obtaining the pendant from the Cavern of the Wyverns, we can talk to the wyvern, who asks us to travel to the life spring at the bottom of the cavern we just came from to plant its egg. We do so, fighting some chimera at the bottom, their debut to the series, before returning to the castle to see the wyvern has passed away. Back at Altair, we learn the princess has been acting funny ever since returning from the Dreadnought. After an unsuccessful attempt to seduce Fiorine, she reveals herself as a Lamia Queen, who given the unique boss music, I assume is supposed to be the first proper boss fight of the game. I couldn't tell through gameplay though, the fight wasn't hard. Slaying her, a guard then comes in and tells us of a tournament being held in Palamacia, with Princess Hilda to be the prize. Gordon offers to help us, which he does, leaving Layla to command the army. Earlier, I mentioned a moment in the game where the impact of having party members fight with you benefits the story by adding weight and closeness to relationships that otherwise feel unnatural. Layla taking command of the rebellion, looked at logically, is crazy. This pirate, who tried to rob us, who we've only taken on a single mission to Deist, has been entrusted command of not just the rebellion, but the remnants of the kingdom of Finn? Like, obviously doesn't make sense. However, it doesn't feel totally unnatural while playing the game, given we have been fighting with her in the party for the last hour. We are automatically, as the player, predispositioned to care about her because we have spent that time together. At the Palamacian Colosseum, we meet, for the first time since the opening, the Emperor. I wish he was featured more in the game, as I really like the idea of a villain like this, the emperor of a tyrannical empire who gained his powers through his connection and eventual rule over hell. But the little we do see is effective enough. He locks us in the arena to face a behemoth. I swear, whenever I see one of these guys, I get excited for the battle ahead. Unfortunately, the first iteration of him in this game isn't the strongest, but nothing in this game is, so whatever. And even still, the sprite of this guy is noticeably awesome looking, so the experience still holds up. After defeating it, we are invited up to his throne, where before we can strike him down, he disappears, surrounding us with guards who take us to the dungeon. We are soon freed by Paul, the thief we freed from Simmet Falls on our quest to get Mithril. We then proceed through a short dungeon to rescue Hilda, who escapes from the Colosseum with Gordon to regroup in Altair. Since there isn't much to say about this dungeon, I'll use this chance to say how much I love the battle OST of this game. It has a very similar energy to FF1's, but, I feel at least, more depth, more urgency, more excitement. It's an amazing OST that was a constant bright spot when being greeted with a random encounter every 3 seconds. In Altair, we notice the town seemingly abandoned other than a guard at the entrance. He tells us the reclamation of Fynn has begun, and the rebellion is making camp in the forest a little to the south of Fynn. Speaking with Gordon and Hilda here, we are tasked with leading the vanguard to reclaim the castle. This is a really cool moment in the story. It highlights just how much the party has grown from being hesitantly asked to check on the status of Fynn in the start of the game, to being tasked with leading the attack to reclaim it. In the castle, we regroup with Layla and fight our way up to the throne room. I'll take this chance to quickly cover dungeon loot. It's much the same issue I had with FF1. Dungeon loot in every dungeon other than the last 2 is generally pretty underwhelming. There are some bright spots due to the inability to purchase a wide variety of gear in towns, but these bright spots aside, the game has plenty of chests with 1000 gil when you already have 200,000 plus, unfortunately. Also, side note, there have been no new towns in this game since Bask, which is crazy. In the throne room, we fight an undead commander, Gotos. At least with Borgen there was a mention of him being a traitor of Fynn before fighting him, but this guy just comes out of nowhere. Well, whatever, with him down we have successfully reclaimed Fynn. The rebellion has had their biggest win yet and things are looking up. Surely nothing can go wrong from here. The next part of this game will see things go very, very wrong from here. It starts with some direction from Hilda and Gordon. They start by telling us more about the mirror room in the castle. Supposedly it's used to summon a wyvern, something to keep in mind. We are then given our main objective. Minwu has gone dark after he went on his mission to find the Ultima Tome. We are being tasked with travelling to the town of Mysidia to learn more about Minwu's disappearance as well as to help him retrieve the tome. While Fynn doesn't know everything about how to obtain the tome, they do know it requires 2 masks. A white one, located beneath the castle behind a secret passage we need the password Ekmet Telios to open, and a black one, whose whereabouts are unknown at the moment. After employing the help of Paul, the thief from Simmet Falls and the Colosseum, we discover the secret passage and journey through the underside of the castle to obtain the white mask. With that in hand, we travel south to Mysidia. On the way, I stop by Mysidia Cave, a dungeon where the path forward is being blocked by a doppelganger of Furion we can't fight. Similarly to how the caravan in FF1 was a moment I lost major gamer cred, finding Mysidia is probably another one of those moments. This place is hidden when looking at the big view of the world map, and I didn't put together that the town Mysidia is probably nearby the Mysidia Cave. Regardless, arriving at Mysidia was a massive breath of fresh air. Finally, we have a new town, and to its credit, it's a neat town. I love how the magic shop in the town of Mages has 5 vendors selling magic from all across the game. It's really cool. What isn't as cool though is the weapon and armor shops. I haven't talked much about my builds for the party yet, as I feel I just went for the default, high evasion builds in everyone, with Furion doing double swords, Maria doing magic and Guy brawling. So as someone who wants high evasion but doesn't want to equip a shield, I thought surely the town of Mages would sell complementary gear, but alas, it was not to be. The gear sold in all the towns are generally the same high defense function, just a higher tier as you progress. The real gear to suit builds like mine need to be found in the dungeons across the game. Back on track though, in Mysidia we learn of what we must do to get Ultima. We need to put the black and white masks on their respective statues to open the way to the crystal rod, which can be used to break the seal on the Mysidia tower which hold Ultima. They also tell us of the whereabouts of the black mask. It is on a tiny island in the middle of the ocean, at the bottom of the dungeon there. Finally, we are guided to the middle of the village, where underground there is a statue we can place the white mask on. This isn't super clear while playing, but this actually immobilizes the doppelganger from the Mysidia cave, allowing us to interact with it. But we don't need to worry about that for now. Proceeding to the tropical island, we meet a colony of people with masks who don't seem too happy with the idea of us taking the black mask. We don't care much for their objections though and take it anyways. With the black mask obtained, I've stopped mentioning mini bosses by the way because of how much of a joke they are. We go back to Mysidia Cave and put the black mask on the doppelganger. This allows us to proceed deeper in to obtain the crystal rod. When we try and make our way to the tower though, we are swallowed by another Final Fantasy legend, Leviathan. After being separated from Layla, who did not get swallowed, inside we learn a whole colony of people also have been trapped here trying to enter the tower with their own crystal rod. Luckily though, we meet a man wearing strange armor called Ricard. Turns out, he is a dragoon, the last one living in fact. He agrees to team up with us to fight the monster guarding a boat further in the beast. With his help, he was on the floor the whole time like a good dragoon, we are able to defeat the beast. Making our way out of Leviathan and entering Mysidia Tower with Ricard in tow, it's time again to slow it down and talk about combat, but this time it's the big one. We've covered a lot of issues with combat so far, mostly in regards to the clarity of information, but that isn't what really kills combat, what makes it completely and utterly unbearable. Let's talk about the enemy level cap. The enemy level cap is, surprise surprise, a hidden, unexplained system in the game with the function of slowing your ability to level up weapon skills. It works like so. Every enemy in the game has an associated level cap. This level cap is the maximum level you can get EXP from using your skills against them. For example, take this fight here against the Killer Mantis and Vampire Girl. Despite Guy hitting the Vampire Girl with his fists, after the battle, Guy gets no fist EXP. This is due to this enemy level cap. This Vampire Girl cannot give Guy fist EXP at or above level 10. Let's think about the consequences of this. This means there was 0 point of Guy attacking here. He got no EXP or growth from this fight. This fight was a waste of time. This level cap, by the way, really starts to be felt as early as the Snow Cavern. So that means for, no hyperbole, 99% of combat encounters after this point, at about the 1/3 mark of the game, attacking and killing the enemy does not grow your character's strength at all. I know I worded that sentence strangely, and that's because what someone is probably screaming right now, that there is a workaround for this cap. And there is, but it is the most stupid, idiotic thing I've ever seen in a game. In Final Fantasy II, while enemies have a level cap, the main party doesn't. This means the intended way to grind your level past what it is meant to be is to beat up your own party members. What in the ever-living fuck were they thinking here? Like, for real, what were they doing? Grinding in this game doesn't look like killing enemies, it's sitting in a random encounter with a wasp and beating yourself up. Unreal. When you're exploring a dungeon, 99% of the fights you have against enemies are a complete waste of time for your weapon skills. The only way to get something out of most encounters is to start beating up your own team to get experience. This is the silver bullet that completely and totally killed the combat of this game. This is the most unbelievable game design decision I have ever and will ever see. Not even the next biggest failure in the series, Final Fantasy VIII, comes close to being this bad. Let's just keep pushing forward. Initially, I was liking the look of Mysidia Tower. I liked how as we get higher and higher, the floors get hotter and hotter, then colder and colder. But like all things Final Fantasy II, they just don't know when to end it, and it goes on way too long. Finally reaching the top, we find Minwu investigating a door blocked by a magic seal. Talking to him, he concludes the only way to proceed will be if he blasts the door with all the magical energy he has, which he then does. Unfortunately, this kills him in the process. Another party member sacrificing themselves so we can continue our quest to put an end to this war. Inside the room, we find many lit stones. Interacting with them, we gain a ton of stat boosts, increasing our strength, magic, intellect and spirit by 10 points each, on top of unlocking the Ultima Tome, the strongest magic in the game. I like to see this moment as the party being given the strength that bridges the gap from them being normal people to becoming true warriors of light like the first game's party. Leaving the tower, you may notice on the world map the icons for Poft, Palum, Gatreya and Altair are completely gone. On our way to investigate why, we try out the Ultima magic, and Jesus Christ, it sucks ass. I have a complicated opinion on this. On the one hand, I like that you need to level this magic from 0 to hero, reminds me of Fire Emblem units that start really bad but grow into team aces. On the other hand though, we need to think about this practically. Seeing this, we need to assume the player is able to recognize that it is meant to start bad and grow into being great. A reasonable assumption to make. Given that, players have a choice they need to make now if they want this spell to be usable by the end of the game. Do they go all in on leveling Ultima to make it the best it can be? Or do they stop using it and continue with the spells, or spell singular in my case, they have been using before this. In my playthrough, I decided to take a risk and go all in on Ultima, a decision that, and I mean this with all seriousness, completely saved my playthrough from ruin when facing the final boss. Of course, I knew ahead of time the final boss had defense at the wazoo, and I suspected Ultima bypassed defense when calculating damage. But is this reasonable for someone on a first playthrough together? Personally, I know I didn't put that together and ended up having to cheat to defeat the final boss for lack of damage on my end, but I've already been super harsh on the game and I'm willing to chalk that up to me not getting the point of Ultima. So, going all in on leveling Ultima, we make our way past Altair to see a grisly sight. The entire town has been razed to the ground. There is nothing to even go into. I love this. This is amazing to see coming from FF1. The world map in FF2 really feels alive. Do the airships flying about, do the way towns changed after the Dreadnought bombs them to now, with the complete erasure of whole towns. This moment is where the world map theme OST playing throughout the game feels the most fitting. The world map OST in FF1 was telling of the type of game that was. It was a magical adventure of 4 valiant knights trying to save the world. FF2 is different though. Its world map theme is one of sadness, despair and pain. But even still, even in the overwhelming sadness, there are hopeful moments. The light Firion, Maria and Guy bring to the world is strong enough to permeate the suffocating sadness of the rest of the track. It's just incredible. I've been praising a lot of this game in the context of someone playing this game in 1988, but genuinely, in the shoes of a 2026 gamer, this is still really impressive to me. Talking with Hilda, we learned the Empire has made their move against Finn. The Emperor has summoned a massive cyclone that has ripped through most of its unconquered lands, and it is now on Finn's doorstep. She tells us we can use the pendant we got in Diced on the mirror to summon the wyvern we planted in that cave. We do so, gaining a means to enter the cyclone and bring the fight to the Emperor. The Cyclone Castle is the first of 2 fake-out final dungeons. Something I've seen a few JRPGs do, which personally, nothing against the game here by the way, but just very personally, I wonder how you feel about this, grinds my gears. Because I sit down to finish a game in the mindset of I'm ready to see the ending, when all of a sudden, guess what, there's more bucko. Again, nothing against the game here, I just wanted to put it out there in case I wasn't alone in this feeling. Anyways, making our way to the top, we find the Emperor in the throne room. After taking on waves of guards, we get a chance to fight him directly now. In probably the most egregious example of bosses being way too easy, the Emperor is a total cakewalk. I get that this is meant to be an underpowered form of him, but even still he's just as weak as like a random knight you find in the dungeon. This fight felt very underwhelming. The right way to do something like this would be to give the player a hint he will come back. Maybe a portal appears to take him away while he's flashing, or, you know, better yet, just make him stronger. With the Emperor dead, as far as we know, we have won. We did it. To celebrate, we have a dance in the throne room of Finn. This is actually, in my opinion and in all seriousness, the best series storyline started in this game out of everything invented here. A dance scene in Final Fantasy is always a showcase of the technology of the time. You know, in the starting town of Pokemon, you have that guy who tells you about the technology you use for the game? Well, imagine that, but done in a subtle and effective cutscene for whatever context the dance is in the game for. Put simply, we see in a Final Fantasy dance scene the capacity of the game to tell a story. We also in this scene get payoff for the building relationship between Firion and Maria, who share a dance together. However, the temporary peace is suddenly interrupted by a dying guard bursting in, saying that the Dark Knight, now publicly known to be Leon, just ascended the throne of the Empire and is amassing an army of troops to invade and slaughter Finn. Maria is understandably upset by this, emphasizing that we need to talk to him to understand why. Upon learning that the fortress is too high in the mountains to be reached by foot, we go to speak with Paul to see if he knows a way in. Upon entering his house though, we see Sid on his deathbed. It looks like he was caught in the tornado that took Paloom. As his final act, he gives us his airship before passing away. Talking with Paul, we learn there is a way into the fortress through the air. With Sid's airship, we have hope. Leaving Finn, we see Sid's airship docked in Paloom. Travelling over and getting in, we have officially unlocked the airship. Unfortunately, the only new place we can access with the airship is Palamacia Castle. While the ship was only mostly a tool of convenience, the airship is completely that. There are no new locations outside of the dungeon to discover, no places we couldn't land on before without the airship. There is no tie in Final Fantasy II between unlocking the airship and an expansion of the scope of our adventure. Taking our airship to the castle, we work through the dungeon to find Leon sitting upon the throne. We hear his belief that strength alone rules the world, and he has a right to rule this way. Before we can fight though, a portal on the throne opens and the Emperor emerges in a new form. We learn in Hell, he became its king and has returned to destroy the world. He traps us in spires of flame, and it's only through Ricard's noble sacrifice that we are able to escape before the castle is consumed and becomes pandemonium. With Leon in tow, we return to Fynn, where we tell Hilda of the Emperor's revival. Leon concludes with the Emperor alive, only death will follow. So that, plus the memories of his time with Firion and Maria as kids, convince him to join the party to help kill the Emperor. Leon's turn away from the dark side does feel noticeably sudden while playing. Like half an hour before he joins the party, you hear he's going to kill everyone in Fynn. In saying that, however, I don't mind it. There's enough room for imagination in the plot to conclude that maybe Maria spoke with him off screen, or just seeing Maria and his friends made him remember himself. Or maybe the Emperor mind controlled him, forcing him to become artificially strong, as seen with his high HP pool versus non-existent mana. Speaking with Hilda, she informs us that we can enter Hell to fight the Emperor through the Jade Passage. On the WOD map, we are shown a small lake that matches with what Gordon explained to be the entrance to the passage. As we make our way there with Leon, the final fourth party member with us, we need to talk fully on this system. There are two very different approaches I can see to this. On a first playthrough, you will likely waste EXP using the previous temporary party members, then feel shortchanged by the time your actual last party member joins, and you see that those party members you previously built don't return. The first refutation to this would be, but what about the enemy level cap? If your main three aren't getting EXP, why not give it to the fourth? But my answer to this is another question. Why would I give it to them if 1, combat is so easy to be doable with 3 people, and 2, all the EXP they got is wasted when they leave the party? I also disagree with the sentiment that the player should remember Leon is coming from the naming character screen. By this point in the game, you named your characters 13 or 14 hours ago. It's 100% reasonable to believe they would have forgot about him until his name was mentioned again in the dance scene in Fynn. So it's not a situation where it's reasonable to expect players to be waiting for him to arrive before doing massive Fight Club-esque grind sessions. Now, on a second playthrough, while you don't have the same concerns, you can much more clearly see how the system backfires against the mission statement of the game. The mission of allowing you to build your own Warriors of Light however you want. You can't do that if your 4th Build-A-Bear is only given to you in the 11th hour, and you aren't going to do that for the Build-A-Bears that are either going to die or sit on the bench after their time in the spotlight is over. Overall, just another baffling system to add to the list of all the dumb combat design decisions. We're on the home stretch now, and luckily I think these last 2 dungeons are a bright spot for the game. The Jade Passage and later Pandemonium actually have really cool and unique designs, both fit the theme and aesthetic of their dungeons. It also helps that through these dungeons, loot also gets really interesting, like in FF1. Here, you can not only find a hidden vendor selling previously unavailable spells like Haste, you can also find the Masamune, Ribbon and Genji armor set, all returning from FF1. Making our way into Pandemonium, I was immediately stunned by how cool the place looked and sounded. I love the mirror-like textures used for the floors and walls. It gives an awesome otherworldly feel, totally believable to be the castle of the King of Hell, without looking like the Bowser's castle you probably expect. And the OST here is just chef's kiss, another S tier track in a game chock full of them. Proceeding through the dungeon, I get very, very, very lucky checking this wall and finding the Masamune. Fully serious, this, alongside leveling Ultima, but especially this lucky find, saved my run. After fighting some really cool mini-bosses like Beelzebub and Tiamat, which I can't help but wish were sprinkled in some of the other dungeons in the game, we arrive at the throne room to fight the real final boss. The Emperor, in his awesome looking golden form, proclaims that humanity will never be able to overcome Hell's power. The fight starts and humanity proceeds to overcome Hell's power. Now, I'm torn on this final boss. Let's start with the slam dunks. Visually, stunning, no question. Audio wise, the final boss theme is amazing. Holy shit, the Pixel Remaster OST is so fire. Now onto how it played, I'll speak from my experience. For me, the final boss of this game was actually pretty well balanced. The only fight to be like this. It took a good amount of time to kill for a final boss, did some awesome flashy moves and felt like a triumph to defeat. While I think his moves could have done a little more damage, generally, holistically, not thinking about it too hard, it was fine. It does start to fall apart though when you start to think about it. So Guy, who has only ever killed enemies with his fists, does roughly 0 damage in this fight. God knows why. Maybe I made a critical error in leveling him, maybe it was the gear he was wearing, or maybe fists are just a menace on everything except the final boss. I do not know. Leon also did approximately nothing. I'm somewhat willing to chalk this up to me making the mistake of splitting his build between haste bot and double axes, but even still the numbers he were doing were just crazy low. Pretty much, I was only able to defeat the boss because Ultima did consistently good damage from Maria, and Furion with the Masamune did some really great damage. I never skipped random encounters, played the game as close to how I think was intended, for my main trio at least, and I still got shafted at the final boss. I guess all there is to say is that thank God I went all in on Ultima, found Masamune and was making a video, because otherwise I can totally see myself closing the game then and there and watching the ending on YouTube. But that wasn't how this cookie crumbled. We were able to overcome the Emperor, ending the war and saving the world. The final cutscene plays. Hilda thanks us, saying that the world has nothing to fear now. Gordon thanks us for helping him find his courage and rise to be the leader Scott knew he could be. He vows for Kashuan to work with Finn to rebuild the world. Paul crashes out at us for forcing him out of a job, but gives a look of appreciation to the party. Layla offers for Furion to become a pirate, but Marie isn't happy with the offer for Furion to leave with Layla, further hinting at their relationship. She also gives an appreciative look to the group. Joseph's daughter, Nellie, thanks us, saying she will work with the now Queen Hilda to rebuild Finn. We see Joseph's ghost appear, supposedly proud of his daughter. Hilda gives a final thank you before leaving. The party celebrate amongst themselves about their victory, saying they can finally live in peace together. Maria offers this to Leon, but he rejects the offer. His experience with the Dark Knight changed him. The trauma he has gone through and inflicted upon others is not one easily healed, and is a journey he needs to go on himself. A surprisingly mature sentiment for such an old game, but it's Final Fantasy II. There's a reason this game is the precedent setter for the series in terms of story. Furion gives a final farewell to him as Leon leaves the party. As Furion, Maria and Guy leave the throne room, they see the ghosts of their fallen friends and comrades, Minwu, Joseph, Sid and Ricard, all appreciative that they defeated the Emperor and gave meaning to their sacrifice. We end Final Fantasy II on a cutscene similar to the opening, but the game gives an abbreviated version of what it was trying to say with its story and themes, that while the memory of the pain and trauma inflicted by the Empire can heal and mend over time, the memory of the courage and heroism of the Warriors of Light is an eternal beacon of hope for all the generations to come. We get the heartfelt thanks from the developers, customary to all Pixel remasters before the credits roll. Final Fantasy II is a mess. For every story element that was decades ahead of its time, there's a gameplay element that feels like it's actively trying to harm the game. So how do we look at Final Fantasy II in terms of its legacy in the series? I think there's only one way to look at it honestly. It is the necessary evil. The game that took the crazy, off-the-wall, insane risks in every department. The risk of telling a story so far and above that told in Final Fantasy I and very likely most video games at the time. But also the risk of building a completely new leveling system that, while being an abject failure here, is still pivotal in the stories of games with leveling systems that are just more refined versions of this game, such as in 1989, 1 year after this game, with the release of the first Saga game, or in 1990 with the first Fire Emblem game. I am just as confident as when I started this video in saying that this game is one of the most important Final Fantasy games ever. So as time goes on and the memory of the wounds of what this game is heal, the memory of what this game brought to this magical medium of video games should instead be what is remembered.